Welcome to the Vex Robotics Competition referee training videos, designed for both referees and teams. This is Chapter 5, Trapping. Trapping rules, or what used to be called pinning rules, can often be sources of confusion for referees and teams. They can be some of the more subjective calls, and it's difficult to categorize every possible type of robot-on-robot interaction. So the examples and explanations given in this video should help teams and referees to develop a better idea of what trapping is and what it is not. But again, it's impossible to cover all scenarios, so there will be some judgment calls involved. Let's begin with the relevant definition. A robot is trapping if it has restricted the opposing robot into a small, confined area of the field, approximately the size of one foam field tile or less, and has not provided an avenue for escape. Trapping can be direct, such as pinning an opponent to a field perimeter wall, or indirect, such as preventing a robot from escaping a corner of the field. Direct trapping is what used to be called pinning. A robot holding another robot against a field element, such as a wall or a tower, and preventing them from getting away. However, trapping can also be indirect and can be just as effective. This robot is effectively restricted to a small area of the field, but without the aggressive contact associated with a traditional pin. A small area, in this case, is considered one foam tile or less. Remember, a robot does not actually have to be contacting its opponent for trapping to occur, so long as the opponent cannot break out of the confined area and play the rest of the match. Tower Takeover is the first game in a while to not have an expansion limit, so we may see extremely wide robots, sometimes called wallbots. If they're being driven correctly, wallbots are normally not in violation of trapping, as they typically are not restricting opposing robots to a small area of the field. Also, in all forms of trapping, there is a responsibility on the part of the robot being trapped to make a visible and active effort towards breaking free. Simply sitting still will not result in a trapping violation. In VRC Tower Takeover, the corners of the field are where a lot of crucial moments in the match are going to happen. So if a robot is near one of their own goal zones, with an opponent strafing side to side behind them, referees will need to ask themselves, is the offensive robot intending to be there, or are they actively trying to get out? If they're in the act of scoring, they're probably not trying to get out, and it's probably not a trapping call. Now, let's take a look at Rule G15, which explains how pinning and trapping should be handled during a match. A robot may not trap an opposing robot for more than 5 seconds during the driver-controlled period. Once a referee has identified that trapping has begun, they should immediately provide a clear verbal and visual cue to all teams that a count has begun. This means you should use your hand to count, gesture to the violation if possible, and count loudly and clearly. When teams notice a referee counting down, they'll usually back off a lot sooner than the full 5 seconds, and the count effectively ends up acting as a warning to all teams. Also, it's important for referees to be assertive when calling for a trapping count. Referees are sometimes hesitant to start counting until after the trap has already been clearly established, which can actually turn a 5-second count into 8 or 9 seconds of actual trapping. This is one of the most common sources of frustration for teams and new referees. A direct trap, often referred to as a pin, should be easy to identify. Watch for a robot stuck between a field element and an opponent robot, not moving. An indirect trap may be more difficult to identify, but is still just as important to watch for. So, if you see a robot stuck in a particular area, with a wallbot or an opponent strafing side to side in front of them, they are probably being trapped. If you're still not sure, a verbal warning, such as, "Let him out of there," is a good start. The next section of the rule states, a trap is officially over once the trapping robot has moved away and the robots are separated by at least 2 feet or approximately 1 foam tile. After ending a trap, a robot may not trap the same robot again for a duration of 5 seconds. If a team does trap the same robot again, the count will resume from where it left off when the trapping robot initially backed off. There should be no confusion that the offending team has either not satisfied their 5 seconds of backing away or has not backed away far enough. This is a very commonly misunderstood part of the call. If you wait for the aggressor to back a full field tile away before even stopping the count, there should be no confusion. Then, once you've stopped the count, take a mental note of the time on the field timer and keep an eye on the aggressor. Defensive teams will often ride the very edge of this limit, which is legal, but only if they wait the full 5 seconds and only if they move the full field tile away. Now, there are 2 other subtle details regarding trapping that are worth mentioning. First, if an opposing robot blocks a team from moving away and breaking a pin, then the count can be ended. This robot sandwich is related to G14, which states that you cannot cause an opponent to violate a rule. In this interpretation, you cannot force a robot to trap another robot. And lastly, but sometimes most importantly, if your robot stops working for any reason, you're still responsible for its actions. This means that if you're in the act of trapping, lose control of your robot, and your opponent is still unable to break free, then a trapping count or violation would still occur. That being said, the opposite is also true. If your robot malfunctions while you're being trapped and you stop trying to escape, then the count will stop. This could mean a dead battery, an overheated motor, even a radio disconnect. In any case, your robot is no longer actively trying to break free. It would be silly to penalize someone for trapping a robot that can't move. Sometimes, when a trapping count occurs, drivers will try and show the referee that they're not touching their controls. This is actually counter to the definition of trapping, as we just explained. If you're the one being trapped and you're not touching the controls, then you're essentially telling the referee to stop counting because you're no longer trying to break free. On the other hand, if you're the one doing the trapping, it doesn't matter whether you're touching your controls or not, because you're still responsible for the actions of your own robot. Trapping can be one of the most difficult calls to make in the VEX Robotics competition, but it is absolutely necessary to ensure a fair and offensive game. As such, referees need to be vigilant and confident when watching for these violations. They also need to clearly communicate when warning teams and counting out loud to deter potential violations. That's all for Chapter 5, so thanks for watching. And be sure to check out the other chapters in this referee training series on other specific refereeing topics.